So welcome. We're about to finish, I hope today, close to finish chapter 2 of the human condition, which is on the public and private realm. We started speaking about it last month. And just to set the stage again and to remind ourselves why this is important, it's not about human nature, but it's about those conditions of human life as it has emerged on the earth over the last few thousand years, and namely those conditions that, as that life has emerged, have, in Arendt's opinion, made human life meaningful and have constituted what it means to be human. Three of the main activities of human life, as Arendt understands it, are labor, work, and action. These are part of what she means by the human condition. They're part of what she calls the vita activa, the active life. And as she says in the prologue, as we discussed a few months ago, this active life, this human condition, is threatened today. It is threatened by a number of things, but two that she talks about in the prologue are the rise of technology and science, namely the launch of Sputnik, which she says has the capacity to change the very nature of what man is by taking away or making ever more difficult its earthliness, right? She says earth is the quintessence of the human condition. And we talked about what earthliness meant. It was the fact that man lived a life that was not fully controlled, that he was born, that he died, he didn't control his entire life. And that we are in danger, she says, of ending that, of transforming that world. Two important aspects of the human condition and of the world as she understands it are the fact that man has always had a public and a private realm. And this is being threatened now by the rise of what she calls the social, which we talked about last month. In sections 7 and 8 and 9, we have her describing what the public realm is and then what the private realm is. And these are incredibly important chapters in her book. She believes that both the public and the private realms are absolutely essential for what it means to be human. And we need to understand why, and then understand why they are both threatened by what she calls the rise of the social. So I want to start with section 7, the public realm or the common. And as often is the case, right there in the title, she tells you the answer. The public realm is important because it provides us with what is common. She says, we should turn your mics off. Turn your mics off, please, if you haven't. The public realm is important because it's the common. And she says there are two closely interrelated but not altogether identical phenomena that signify the public. And the first is on page 50, and it's simply the fact that everything that appears in public can be seen and heard by everybody and has the widest possible publicity. This is a point that is made over and over again in different of Arendt's writings. It's absolutely essential to understanding her overarching thinking, and it is that appearance gives reality. Whereas for most of philosophy, as you well know, truth or being is what's most real, as Plato says, whereas appearance is false and appearance is deceptive. Arendt argues that it's the opposite, that appearance is what is most real. And she says in the next sentence, for us, appearance, something that is being seen and heard by others as well as by ourselves, constitutes reality. That's an incredibly important and fascinating point that she wants to make. In a sense, what she's saying is that for human beings, the way we appear to ourselves and to others is the real world in which we live in, right? She's here making a point that is in many ways opposed to Platonic philosophy, but also opposed to Kantian idealist philosophy and all scientific thinking, because the essence of scientific thinking is that what is true is not what you see, but is what accords with universal laws that often you can't see or perceive, but you can know. And the reason that scientific philosophy arises at around the same time as epistemology with Descartes and Kant is because that for Descartes and Kant, again, we don't actually see the things themselves. We don't know with certainty the truth of the world. What we know is what we see and imagine through our eyes. And so this is an essential disagreement with the history of philosophy and with the rise of science. And what she's saying is that what is most important for humans, what is most real, is actually what appears. Now, what appears doesn't have to be natural. It can be storytelling. It can be artworks. It can be artistic transposition of individual experiences, as she says in the middle of the page. The point is that what appears can be artificial and beautiful and remade, but what appears is what is real. Because the public world, the common world, is what we share and is what is real, we also need a private realm because we can't all live in constant transparency. We can't all live in constant being exposed to the bright light of the constant presence of others, as she says on page 51. Right? We need a place to hide. There are certain things that don't and can't exist in the public realm. And she names many things in these few chapters and others, but things like love, right? Love cannot exist, she says, in the public world. If you publicize your love to somebody, it becomes weak. Goodness, she'll say in section 10, is something that as soon as it becomes too public, loses its quality of goodness. It must be held private. Wisdom, another thing that is not to be made too public. And so the first phenomena of the public realm is this idea of appearance and the appearance to many others. The second, which she mentions on page 52, and she says in the second to last paragraph on 52, second, right? The term public signifies the world itself, insofar it is common to all of us and distinguished from our privately owned place in it. Now, we've talked a fair bit in the last few months and meetings about what the world is. The world is different from the earth. It's different from the world of nature. It's the artificially created human world. And so the public is not simply the common as that which appears, but it's the common that which appears that we as humans make. It's the political world. It's the world that we make through our actions and our works of art. It's the world that we share together as human beings. And she gives this example on page 53 of the table on the top of the page. She says the weirdness, this is about 3 lines down from the top of page 53, the weirdness of this situation resembles a spiritualistic seance where a number of people gathered around a table might suddenly, through some magic trick, see the table vanish from their midst, so that 2 persons sitting opposite each other were no longer separated, but also would be entirely unrelated to each other by anything tangible. And what she means by that is that the table a thing that we make and put in the world unites us, because when we sit around the table, we are sitting around the table. Here, we're united on this computer, on this screen. And she says, the common things of the world gather us and bring us together and make a world in which we live. That's what the public is. It's both the fact of appearance, that appearance is what's real, and that a world comes to appear that is comprised of things and actions that we make and that last. And when we get to the section on work in a couple of sessions, you'll see that it's the work of the artist and the work of the craftsman that creates things that last and have duration and thus make a world. And of course, it's also the work of the politicians who create states or polities that last, that make a world. And so on one level, this chapter on the public and thus the common is just telling you that one of the most important things about being human is to live in a world, to live in a common world. She then is also going to talk a little bit about the danger to this common world. And one of those dangers is mass society, right? Mass society in which instead of you having your table and I having my table, but we also understand what a table is, in a mass society, everybody has their own table. Everybody has, and everyone says, well, I don't like your table, I want my table. Everyone becomes their own subject. Everyone becomes their own most important person because everyone is equal. I mean, that's the essence of mass society. Since we're all equal, we're all the same, we each have our table. And as soon as I say to you, but you know what, your table's not really a table. I'm sorry, but it's only got 2 legs. It's not going to work. You say to me, who are you to judge, right? Who are you to judge? You're the same as me. You have no power over me. I say, this is a work of art. You say, no, mine's a work of art. And someone else over here says, no, that's a work of art. And we say, well, who are you to judge? We're all equal. And so in mass society, we have as many works of art and as many artists as there are people. And thus we lose sight of the common, which is that which holds us together. We lose sight of the true. We lose sight of the beautiful. And so Arendt worries that the rise of mass society will threaten the power of the common or the public. She also talks about the rise of the petit bonheur of the French people, right? The idea that there are many small things with which we're enchanted within the space of their own 4 walls. I have a nice little chest or a nice drawer that I bought from Louis XIV, or a dog and a cat and a flower pot, right? And what she says is all these little things, we care more about having them. This is on page 52. Then that they last, that there's quality. We replaced the world of endurance and quality with a world of little pretty objects that we like, tchotchkes, right? And we have tchotchkes all over our house, and they make our house personal, but they disappear. They don't last. You don't pass tchotchkes down to your children, right? You pass things that endure, artworks or craftsmanship works down to your children. And so what she's saying is that greatness has given way to charm on page 52. And you can't have a lasting and deep, meaningful public realm without things that deserve to be remembered, without greatness. And that's what she's talking about here in this chapter on the public world. So the last thing I want to say about this chapter is on pages 54 to 55. And you'll see in the middle of 54, she uses the word worldlessness. Worldlessness is the quality of a common world in which there is no or a lesser degree of a common world. And she says, worldlessness as a political phenomena is possible only on the assumption that the world will not last. And so we talked a lot about how in chapter 1, the third part of chapter 1, she said that immortality was the essential, was different from eternity, but immortality is the essential prerequisite for a world. You have to believe that you can create immortal things. You have to believe that you can be a great artist, or that there are great artists and there are great politicians who will create artworks and political entities, political institutions that last in order to create a world that makes a claim on all of us in it to gather around and hold it in common. And so she'll say at this, in a couple lines below, we need immortality. And she says the Christian abstention from worldly things is by no means the only conclusion one can draw from the conviction that the human artifice, the human artificially made world, a product of mortal hands, is as mortal as its makers. If we lose belief in immortality and we believe that all we can do is make mortal things, well, one option is Christian abstention from the world. We leave the common world and enter the world of Christian, the private world of Christian life. But the other option, if we're not religious, is that the loss of immortality can, on the contrary, intensify the enjoyment and consumption of the things of the world. All manners of intercourse in which the world is not primarily understood to be koinon, common, that which is common to all. And so if Christianity is one response to the loss of the common world, to the immortal world, consumerism is another. The idea that we will simply enjoy and consume the things of the world because they're not going to last anyway. And thus, she says, only the existence of a public realm and the world's subsequent transformation into a community of things which gathers men together and relates them to each other depends entirely on permanence. If you don't have the idea of permanence, that there might be an immortal institutions and immortal works and immortal things, then you cannot have the public realm. A public realm, she says, must be erected, or it cannot not be erected for one generation, right? You can't erect a public realm just for one generation. You have to hope and expect that it will last. And thus it must transcend the lifespan of mortal men. And then I just want to read this next sentence, which is deeply important. Without this transcendence, now what does transcendence mean? She's using it here in a philosophical sense where trans means beyond and sendence means to step or to walk, sendere. So it's without stepping beyond what? Your private, individual, narcissistic, selfish life. Without stepping beyond your private into a public, and thus into a potential earthly immortality, a public that can last and endure for multiple generations. No politics, strictly speaking, no common world, and no public realm is possible. And so here you get why the public realm, the common realm, is possible for Arendt. What the common and public realm are the world of artificial building of a political reality, a political world we share together that we think deserves to be preserved for generations and generations. It is what action towards higher ideals is. It is to build a public world that can last for generations. And that's why the public and the common are so important for Arendt. So let me move on to the next section, section 8, the private realm. So if the public is this common world of transcendence, the private realm is based in the idea of property. And this is important for those of you who are following the Arendt Center at all. You know that, I think you'll know that our upcoming fall conference in October of 2015 is on privacy. It's called Privacy, Why Does It Matter? And it's very much comes out of these few chapters here in Arendt. And she talks about this in many other places as well, but this is the root of it. So this is something that I'm particularly interested in right now. In this section, section 8, she's going to develop 4 ideas of the private. Okay, and I want to go through them one by one because they're all important, and they're all and they're all in some way related to privacy. I mean, to property. So the first idea of privacy is the one she begins right at the beginning. It's the privative idea. It is with respect to the multiple significance of the public realm that the term private in its original privative sense has meaning. To live an entirely private life means, above all, to be deprived of things essential to a truly human life, namely, reality of what appears and is seen and heard of with others. It's to live an insignificant life. So this is the first negative idea of privacy. It's to be completely inhuman, to be completely private, and it's where the word privacy as a privation comes from. The second important idea of privacy is what she calls the non-privative idea of privacy, which she begins to develop on page 61. And this is where it gets, I think, more interesting and more important. So if you look on 61, she says, the profound connection between private and public manifests on its most elementary level in the question of private property is likely to be misunderstood today because of the modern equation of property and wealth on the one side and propertylessness and poverty on the other. The point that she wants to make, and this is a point that, again, is very important in much of her work, is that wealth and property are not the same thing. Property is important because it is what is most our own. It's what's proper to us. In German, Eigentum. It's what's eigen is our own. In English, it's proper. It, as property gives us a sense of who we are. If you own a house, if you own an heirloom desk, if you own a beautiful book of Hannah Arendt's first edition, these things that you own give you a kind of place in the world. And they are very much caught up with who you are as a person. They give you a location in the world. And thus there's a sacredness to property. So that we thought old estates were passed down through generations, and they have names and they have stories and they have personalities. And a house that lasts and is made and given over to generations has a kind of sacredness to it. At the same time, the house and the property has a kind of mysteriousness to it, and it hides certain parts of yourself from the public. And so this idea of property, she says, is deeply important. The problem is that in the modern era, which she thinks begins with the expropriation of the peasants from their land, is characterized by the transformation of property into wealth. And wealth doesn't actually require physical, tangible property. It just requires money, and not even physical, tangible money, but Bitcoin or whatever it is that one has today. But it requires just that you have a certain value or wealth that's exchangeable and transferable. And so wealth diminishes the ability of property to be a space for a sacred space and location in the world. The third way that property is to be understood and important in private realm and in privacy is she talks about on page 63, and it is this idea of the exterior appearance of property. That property is a boundary, and as a boundary and a boundary line, it separates us from others. And this goes back to the public. You need to be both common but also separate. And so on the one hand, property can separate one city from another and make it a common public world. But within the city, it separates each house from each house, and thus provides certain laws and also rules for both privacy and also when you enter the public realm. So the idea of my house is my castle is what she has in mind here. It's both my castle and that I can retreat to it and be hidden, but it also is when I leave the house, it defines when I'm in a public world and I'm in a private world. And for her, this is an important part of what privacy does. Is it allows us to be both private and public. And then the fourth way that she describes privacy and private realm here comes back to wealth. When wealth replaces property, she says, it devours both property and privacy. So she says on page 64, it is therefore not really accurate to say that private property prior to the modern age was thought to be a self-evident condition for admission to the public realm. It is much more than that. It's more than that. It was that, but it's more than that. Privacy was like the other, the dark, hidden side of the public realm. And while to be political meant to attain the highest possibility of human existence, to have no private place of one's own, like a slave, meant to be no longer human. And so I think you'll see why this is what we're going to be talking about at our Arendt Center conference this year, both with surveillance by the government, but also with the complete abandonment of property by individuals through transparency, and whether it's Amazon or Google or Apple or whatever brand you give your privacy to, we are living in a world in which even though people continue to sometimes say privacy is important, although more and more people are saying it's not, they act on a daily basis to give up their privacy. And they will continually trade their privacy for the claim of security and the claim of convenience. And for Arendt, privacy is absolutely necessary in order to be human, because you need these non-privative aspects of privacy, namely that privacy protects the mysteries of your life, that makes you deep and gives depth to life. It protects the boundaries to the public where you know when you are in private and public. And it also, as she says, it is absolutely necessary to give you a place of your own so that you can develop into who you are and not completely influenced by the algorithms and by the social reason of society. Privacy is thus deeply important for individualism and for freedom. And so we're living in a world in which privacy is being circumscribed on an unheard of level, voluntarily, by people giving up privacy for convenience and security. And that's what the conference in the fall is going to be about. So that's chapter 8.